In the central plateau of Cappadocia, where volcanic rock has been shaped by wind, water, and time into soft, tough formations, the landscape conceals a depth that is not immediately visible. Beneath the valleys and fairy chimneys lies a network of human construction that extends far below the surface. Among these subterranean complexes, the Derinkuyu Underground City stands as one of the most extensive and studied examples of underground habitation in the ancient world. The existence of such underground spaces was known locally for centuries, but systematic archaeological attention to Derinkuyu began only in the 20th century. In 1963, a resident renovating his home reportedly uncovered a concealed passage behind a wall. This discovery led to the recognition of a vast, multi-level city carved directly into the bedrock. Subsequent exploration revealed that the site extends to a depth of approximately 60 meters, with at least 8 levels currently accessible, although some estimates suggest that deeper sections remain unexplored. The geological conditions of Cappadocia played a decisive role in making such a construction possible. The region's soft volcanic tuff, formed by ancient eruptions from nearby volcanoes such as Mount Erciyes and Mount Hasson, can be carved with relative ease using basic tools. At the same time, once exposed to air, the material hardens, creating stable surfaces capable of supporting complex structures. Archaeological evidence indicates that these properties were well understood by ancient inhabitants who exploited them to create dwellings, storage areas, religious spaces, and defensive refuges. The origins of Derinkuyu remain a subject of scholarly debate. Some researchers propose that the earliest phases of excavation date back to the Phrygians, an Indo-European people who settled in Anatolia during the first millennium BC. This interpretation is based on parallels between known Phrygian rock-cut architecture and some of the structural elements observed within the underground complex. Others suggest that earlier communities may have initiated the first excavations, with later civilizations expanding and modifying the site over centuries. What is more clearly established is that the underground city was in use during the Byzantine period, particularly between the 4th and 10th centuries CE. During this time, Cappadocia was part of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire, and the region experienced periods of instability, including incursions by Arab forces. Historical sources, combined with archaeological findings, suggest that underground cities like Derinkuyu functioned as temporary refuges during times of conflict. Their design reflects a careful consideration of defense, sustainability, and concealment. Access to the city is provided through a series of narrow entrances that could be easily hidden or sealed. Once inside, passageways connect a complex arrangement of rooms, corridors, and shafts. The layout is not symmetrical but appears to have developed incrementally, with new sections added as needs evolved. The lower levels, which required more effort to excavate, were likely reserved for essential functions such as storage and water access, while upper levels provided living spaces and communal areas. One of the most distinctive features of Derinkuyu is its system of ventilation shafts. These vertical channels, some extending through multiple levels, ensured a continuous supply of fresh air throughout the underground environment. The largest of these shafts, measuring several meters in diameter, also served as a well, providing access to groundwater. Archaeological analysis indicates that some wells were designed to be accessible only from within the city, preventing outsiders from contaminating the water supply during periods of siege. The internal organization of the city reflects a high degree of planning. Rooms identified as kitchens contain soot-blackened ceilings, indicating prolonged use of open flames. Storage areas include niches and compartments suitable for holding food supplies, suggesting that inhabitants prepared for extended stays underground. There is also evidence of wine and oil production, with presses carved directly into the rock. These installations imply not only survival strategies but also elements of daily life continuing beneath the surface. Religious practice appears to have been an integral part of the underground community. Several chambers have been identified as chapels, with simple altars and seating arrangements. One of the larger spaces resembles a cruciform plan, characteristic of early Christian worship spaces. This aligns with historical records indicating that Cappadocia was an important center of early Christianity, particularly during periods when believers sought refuge from persecution. Defensive features are among the most striking aspects of Derinkuyu's design. Massive circular stone doors, some weighing several hundred kilograms, could be rolled into place to block passageways. These doors were typically positioned at strategic points, such as the entrances to corridors connecting different levels. Each door could be operated from the inside, allowing inhabitants to isolate sections of the city if necessary. Slits in the doors permitted communication or the use of spears to deter intruders. The capacity of Derinkuyu has been estimated by archaeologists to accommodate up to 20,000 people, along with livestock and supplies. This figure is based on the volume of available space and the distribution of facilities within the complex. While it is unlikely that the city was continuously inhabited by such a large population, it suggests that the site was intended to serve as a refuge for entire communities during times of crisis. The relationship between Derinkuyu and other underground cities in the region adds another layer of complexity. Cappadocia contains numerous similar sites, including Kaymakli, Oskanak, and Matsi, many of which share architectural features and construction techniques. Some scholars propose that these cities were interconnected through tunnels, forming a network that allowed movement across considerable distances without exposure to the surface. While certain connections have been documented, the full extent of such networks remains uncertain. Archaeological methods used to study Derinkuyu include stratigraphic analysis, tool mark examination, and comparative architectural study. These approaches help establish relative chronologies and identify phases of expansion. However, precise dating remains challenging due to the nature of rock-cut architecture, which does not always preserve organic materials suitable for radiocarbon dating. As a result, interpretations often rely on indirect evidence, such as associated artifacts and historical context. The rediscovery of Derinkuyu in the modern era prompted efforts to stabilize and preserve the site. Sections deemed unsafe have been closed to visitors, while others have been reinforced to allow controlled access. Today, a portion of the underground city is open to the public, providing a glimpse into a form of habitation that differs significantly from surface settlements. Tourism has brought increased attention to the site, but it also raises questions about conservation and the long-term impact of human activity on fragile underground environments. Scholars continue to examine Derinkuyu not only as an architectural achievement but also as a reflection of human adaptation to environmental and political conditions. The decision to construct and maintain such an extensive underground complex suggests a response to recurring threats, whether from warfare, climate, or other factors. It also indicates a level of social organization capable of coordinating large-scale labor over extended periods. The broader historical context of Cappadocia provides insight into why such developments occurred in this region. Positioned at the crossroads of major trade routes, the area was influenced by successive empires, including the Hittites, Persians, Romans, and Byzantines. Each of these cultures contributed to the region's cultural and architectural landscape. The underground cities, while not unique to Cappadocia, reach a level of scale and complexity here that is rarely observed elsewhere. Interpretations of Derinkuyu's primary function vary. While the defensive refuge model is widely accepted, some researchers argue that the city may have also supported semi-permanent or seasonal habitation. The presence of facilities for food production, religious practice, and daily living supports this view. However, the absence of certain features typical of permanent settlements, such as large-scale waste disposal systems, suggests that occupation may have been intermittent. The question of how such a large project was organized remains open. The excavation of Derinkuyu would have required significant labor, planning, and knowledge of engineering principles. Tool marks indicate the use of simple implements, likely metal chisels and hammers, yet the precision of certain features, such as ventilation shafts and door mechanisms, points to specialized skills. Whether this work was carried out by centralized authorities, local communities, or a combination of both is not definitively known. As research continues, Derinkuyu offers a valuable case study in the intersection of geology, architecture, and human history. It demonstrates how natural conditions can shape human responses, leading to solutions that are both practical and innovative. At the same time, it raises questions about the limits of current knowledge and the potential for future discoveries within the still unexplored sections of the underground network. Beneath the surface of Cappadocia, the carved chambers of Derinkuyu remain a testament to a form of life adapted to concealment and endurance. The silence of its corridors and the complexity of its design invite careful study rather than speculation, grounding its significance in evidence that continues to be examined, layer by layer, within the stone itself. The internal complexity of Derinkuyu Underground City becomes more apparent as examination moves beyond its initial entrances and into the deeper levels of the structure. What at first appears to be a network of narrow corridors reveals, upon closer study, a carefully organized environment in which space, movement, and function were tightly integrated. The architectural logic of the city reflects not only adaptation to geological conditions but also an understanding of long-term habitation requirements under constrained circumstances. Descending through the upper levels, the passageways narrow deliberately. This narrowing is not random but appears to be a defensive measure, limiting the number of individuals who could move through at one time. In several sections, ceilings are intentionally low, forcing movement in a stooped position. Archaeologists interpret these features as part of a broader strategy to control access and slow potential intruders. The placement of these constrictions often coincides with locations where large circular stone doors could be deployed, reinforcing the defensive design of the city. These stone doors, carved from dense rock, are among the most recognizable features of Derinkuyu. Their construction demonstrates both practical engineering and strategic foresight. Each door is mounted within a recessed groove, allowing it to be rolled into place from the inside. The weight of these doors, in some cases exceeding several hundred kilograms, ensured that they could not be easily forced open from the outside. Small apertures in the center of some doors may have allowed inhabitants to observe or communicate without compromising security. The distribution of these doors across multiple levels suggests that the city could be compartmentalized, isolating sections if necessary. Beyond the defensive architecture, the organization of space within Derinkuyu reflects a division of labor and communal life. Rooms identified as living quarters vary in size, with some capable of accommodating small family groups, while others appear to have served larger communal functions. The absence of decorative elements in most chambers indicates a focus on utility rather than aesthetic expression. Surfaces are generally smooth but unadorned, shaped by practical considerations rather than symbolic ones. Kitchens are identifiable by the presence of hearths and soot deposits on ceilings. The accumulation of soot provides evidence of repeated use over extended periods, suggesting that food preparation was a central and continuous activity within the underground environment. Ventilation shafts positioned near these areas would have been essential in dispersing smoke and maintaining air quality. The efficiency of this system is notable, given the depth and density of the structure. Modern measurements indicate that airflow within the shafts remains effective, supporting the interpretation that ventilation was a primary concern during construction. Storage facilities are distributed throughout the city, often located in cooler, deeper sections where temperature fluctuations are minimal. These rooms contain carved niches and depressions suitable for holding containers or bulk goods. Archaeological findings from comparable sites in Cappadocia include remnants of grains, dried fruits, and other preserved foods, although direct evidence from Derinkuyu itself is limited due to centuries of disturbance. Nevertheless, the architectural provisions strongly suggest that inhabitants prepared for extended periods underground, potentially lasting weeks or months. One of the more specialized areas within Derinkuyu includes spaces interpreted as stables. These chambers, typically located near entrances or in upper levels, contain features consistent with the housing of animals, such as tethering points and feeding troughs carved into the rock. The inclusion of livestock within the underground environment would have provided a reliable source of food, as well as materials such as wool and leather. However, the presence of animals also introduces questions about sanitation and air quality. The effectiveness of ventilation systems would have been critical in mitigating these challenges. Water management within the city represents another key aspect of its design. The main ventilation shaft, which also functions as a well, extends from the surface to lower levels, providing access to groundwater. Some scholars suggest that additional wells existed, possibly concealed or restricted to internal use. This would have prevented external forces from poisoning or cutting off the water supply during periods of siege. The integration of water access with ventilation infrastructure demonstrates a dual-purpose approach to essential resources. Religious spaces within Derinkuyu offer insight into the cultural and spiritual life of its inhabitants. Several chambers have been identified as chapels, based on their layout and features. One notable example includes a room with a vaulted ceiling and a simple altar carved into one end. The proportions and orientation of such spaces are consistent with early Christian worship practices in the region. Cappadocia is known for its monastic traditions, particularly during the Byzantine period, and the presence of chapels within the underground city aligns with this historical context. In addition to chapels, there are rooms that may have served as meeting spaces or schools. One large chamber, often referred to as a missionary school in earlier interpretations, contains bench-like structures along its walls. While this designation remains speculative, the arrangement suggests a space intended for instruction or communal gathering. Historians caution against assigning specific functions without direct evidence, but the architectural features indicate that the underground city supported more than basic survival. The vertical organization of Derinkuyu is particularly significant. Movement between levels is facilitated by a network of stairways and shafts, some of which are steep and narrow. These vertical connections are not uniformly distributed, and in some cases, access to lower levels is limited to specific routes. This arrangement may have been designed to control movement and enhance security. It also suggests that different levels had distinct functions, with deeper sections reserved for critical resources and upper levels for more accessible activities. Lighting within the underground city would have relied on oil lamps or similar devices. Evidence of lamp niches carved into walls supports this interpretation. The use of artificial lighting would have been essential, particularly in deeper levels where natural light does not penetrate. The management of fuel for lighting, along with air quality considerations, would have required careful planning. The presence of soot in certain areas may reflect both cooking and lighting activities, making it difficult to distinguish between the two in some cases. Acoustic properties of the underground spaces have also been noted by researchers. The density of the rock and the configuration of chambers can create echoes or dampen sound, depending on location. While there is no direct evidence that acoustics were a primary consideration in design, the experience of sound within the city would have influenced communication and daily life. In confined spaces, controlling noise may have been important, particularly during periods when concealment was necessary. The question of how inhabitants navigated such a complex environment remains an area of interest. The apparent lack of uniform planning raises the possibility that knowledge of the layout was transmitted through familiarity rather than formal mapping. Regular use over generations would have allowed residents to develop an intuitive understanding of pathways and functions. However, for newcomers or temporary occupants, orientation may have been challenging, especially in low-light conditions. Connections between Derinkuyu and other underground sites in Cappadocia continue to be investigated. Some tunnels extending from the city appear to lead toward other settlements, including the nearby underground complex of Cappadocia. While certain passages have been confirmed, the full extent and purpose of these connections are not fully established. It is possible that they served as escape routes, supply lines, or means of communication between communities. The scale of excavation required to create Derinkuyu suggests sustained effort over multiple generations. Tool marks observed on walls and ceilings indicate manual carving using relatively simple implements. The consistency of these marks across different levels implies a shared technique or tradition of construction. Whether this work was organized under centralized authority or carried out by local communities remains uncertain. Some scholars propose that periods of expansion correspond to times of increased external threat, prompting further development of the underground infrastructure. Material culture within the site is relatively sparse, which complicates efforts to reconstruct daily life in detail. Organic materials have largely decomposed, and many portable objects may have been removed over time. As a result, interpretations rely heavily on architectural features and comparisons with better preserved sites. This limitation underscores the importance of cautious analysis and the avoidance of assumptions not supported by evidence. The environmental conditions within Derinkuyu are relatively stable, with temperatures remaining cool throughout the year. This stability would have been advantageous for food preservation and human comfort, particularly during extreme weather on the surface. However, prolonged habitation in such conditions may have presented challenges, including limited exposure to sunlight and potential health effects associated with confined spaces. The extent to which inhabitants adapted to these conditions is not fully understood. Modern exploration of the site has revealed only a portion of its total extent. Several areas remain inaccessible due to safety concerns, including structural instability and insufficient ventilation. Ongoing archaeological work aims to document and preserve the accessible sections while minimizing disturbance. Advances in technology, such as ground-penetrating radar and 3D mapping, offer potential for further insights without extensive excavation. As the internal structure of Derinkuyu continues to be studied, it becomes increasingly clear that the city represents a complex response to a combination of environmental and historical factors. Its architecture embodies practical solutions to challenges of defense, resource management, and communal living. At the same time, it reflects cultural and religious dimensions that shape the lives of its inhabitants. The deeper levels, still only partially understood, suggest that the full story of Derinkuyu has yet to be uncovered. Each chamber, corridor, and shaft contributes to a broader understanding of how ancient communities adapted to uncertainty and risk. The evidence preserved within the rock offers a record not of a single moment, but of an evolving system shaped by necessity, experience, and continuity over time. The question of when Derinkuyu Underground City first began to take shape remains central to its interpretation. Unlike surface settlements, where layers of construction can often be dated through stratified deposits and organic remains, underground complexes present a different challenge. The removal of material rather than its accumulation complicates chronological analysis. As a result, scholars rely on indirect evidence, comparing architectural features, tool marks, and regional historical patterns to construct a timeline. One of the prevailing hypotheses places the earliest phases of excavation during the period of the Phrygians, who established themselves in Anatolia after the decline of the Hittite Empire around the 12th century BC. The Phrygians are known for their rock-cut architecture, particularly in regions such as Gordion and Midas City. Certain stylistic similarities, including the shaping of chambers and entrances, have led some researchers to suggest that early forms of subterranean habitation in Cappadocia may have originated during this time. However, direct evidence linking the Phrygians specifically to Derinkuyu is limited, and this interpretation remains cautious. Another line of inquiry considers the possibility of even earlier origins, perhaps extending into the Hittite period. The Hittites, who controlled much of Anatolia during the 2nd millennium BCE, left behind extensive architectural and administrative records. Yet, there is no definitive documentation describing underground cities of the scale seen at Derinkuyu. Some scholars argue that smaller subterranean spaces may have existed and were later expanded by subsequent cultures. The absence of clear archaeological markers makes it difficult to confirm or refute this possibility. More substantial evidence emerges from the classical and late antique periods, when Cappadocia was integrated into successive imperial systems. Under the Achaemenid Persian Empire, beginning in the 6th century BCE, the region became part of a vast administrative network. While Persian influence is well documented in terms of governance and infrastructure, there is little indication that large-scale underground construction was a primary feature of this period. Instead, it appears more likely that existing local practices continued alongside imperial oversight. The transition to Roman control in the 1st century CE brought increased stability and integration into Mediterranean trade networks. Cappadocia became a Roman province, and its cities developed along conventional lines with roads, public buildings, and agricultural systems. During this time, Christianity began to spread through the region, particularly in rural and semi-urban communities. Early Christian groups often sought seclusion, and Cappadocia's geological landscape provided natural opportunities for concealment. It is within the context of the late Roman and early Byzantine periods that Derinkuyu's expansion becomes more clearly supported by evidence. From the 4th century CE onward, Cappadocia gained prominence as a center of Christian monasticism. Figures such as Basil of Caesarea played a significant role in organizing religious communities and promoting communal forms of monastic life. While Basil's writings do not explicitly describe underground cities, they emphasize structured communal living, resource sharing, and adaptation to challenging environments, principles that align with the organization observed in Derinkuyu. During this period, the Roman Empire underwent significant transformation, eventually dividing into eastern and western halves. The eastern portion, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to govern Cappadocia. The region's location near the empire's eastern frontier exposed it to periodic conflict, particularly during the series of wars between Byzantium and emerging Islamic caliphates from the 7th century onward. Historical sources describe raids and shifting control in frontier regions, creating conditions in which temporary refuge would have been a practical necessity. Archaeological evidence from Derinkuyu supports the interpretation that it functioned as a refuge during these periods of instability. The scale of the city, combined with its defensive features and provisions for extended habitation, suggests that it was designed to accommodate large groups seeking protection. The presence of chapels and communal spaces indicates that social and religious life continued even during periods of concealment. Historians debate the frequency and duration of such occupation. Some propose that the underground city was used intermittently, activated during times of threat and largely unoccupied during stable periods. Others suggest that certain sections may have supported more continuous habitation, particularly for monastic communities or individuals seeking isolation. The available evidence does not conclusively favor one interpretation over the other, and it is possible that usage varied over time. The broader network of underground cities in Cappadocia complicates the picture further. Sites such as Kemakli, Askanak, and others share similar features, including ventilation systems, defensive doors, and multi-level organization. The existence of multiple complexes within relatively close proximity raises questions about coordination and communication. Some scholars argue that these cities formed part of a regional strategy, allowing populations to disperse and reduce vulnerability during attacks. Others view them as independent developments, shaped by similar environmental and historical pressures. Written sources from the Byzantine period provide limited but valuable context. Accounts of Arab-Byzantine conflicts describe raids into Anatolian territories, with local populations sometimes retreating into fortified locations. While underground cities are not always explicitly mentioned, the concept of seeking refuge in concealed or defensible spaces is consistent with the archaeological evidence. The absence of detailed descriptions may reflect the localized nature of these practices or the priorities of historical record-keeping at the time. Following the stabilization of the Byzantine eastern frontier in later centuries, the strategic importance of underground refuges may have diminished. However, Cappadocia continued to experience political change, including the arrival of Seljuk Turks in the 11th century. The transition from Byzantine to Seljuk control introduced new cultural and administrative systems, but the use of existing underground structures may have persisted in some form. Evidence for this later usage is less clear, and further research is needed to understand how these spaces were integrated into changing social contexts. The gradual decline in the use of Derinkuyu likely reflects a combination of factors, including shifts in political stability, changes in settlement patterns, and evolving economic structures. Surface towns and villages offered greater access to trade, agriculture, and communication, reducing the necessity of subterranean living. Over time, entrances may have been sealed or forgotten, leading to the partial abandonment of the underground complex. Despite this decline, local knowledge of underground spaces appears to have persisted. Oral traditions and practical familiarity with the terrain may have preserved awareness of certain chambers, even if the full extent of the city was no longer recognized. This continuity helps explain how the rediscovery in the 20th century, while surprising in scale, was not entirely disconnected from local experience. Modern archaeological work has sought to place Derinkuyu within a broader historical framework, integrating data from multiple disciplines. Geological studies provide insight into the formation and stability of the rock, while architectural analysis reveals patterns of construction and modification. Comparative studies with other sites in Cappadocia and beyond help identify shared features and regional variations. One of the challenges in interpreting Derinkuyu lies in distinguishing between different phases of construction. The absence of clear stratification means that later modifications can obscure earlier features. In some cases, passageways have been widened, rooms expanded, or connections altered, making it difficult to reconstruct the original layout. Careful examination of tool marks and structural relationships allows researchers to propose relative sequences, but absolute dating remains elusive. The role of labor in creating Derinkuyu is another area of ongoing investigation. Excavation on this scale would have required coordinated effort, sustained over long periods. Whether this labor was organized through communal cooperation, religious institutions, or centralized authority is not definitively known. The consistency of construction techniques suggests shared knowledge and possibly the transmission of skills across generations. Environmental considerations also played a role in shaping the city's development. The stable internal temperature of the underground environment would have been advantageous in a region characterized by seasonal extremes. Summers in Cappadocia can be hot and dry, while winters bring cold temperatures and snow. The underground city offered protection from these conditions as well as from external threats. The integration of practical, social, and environmental factors in Derinkuyu's design reflects a complex understanding of human needs. It is not simply a defensive structure but a multifaceted environment capable of supporting community life under constrained conditions. This complexity challenges simplistic interpretations and underscores the importance of examining the site within its full historical and cultural context. As research continues, Derinkuyu remains a subject of careful study rather than definitive conclusions. Each new investigation contributes to a more nuanced understanding, while also highlighting the limitations of current knowledge. The underground city stands not as an isolated anomaly but as part of a broader pattern of adaptation in Cappadocia, where geology, history, and human ingenuity intersect in ways that continue to be explored. The functional life of Derinkuyu Underground City can be understood most clearly by examining how its spaces were used during periods of occupation. While its architectural features indicate preparation for defense and concealment, the internal evidence also reveals a structured environment in which daily activities continued under constrained and carefully managed conditions. The underground city was not merely a shelter of last resort. It was a system designed to sustain organized community life for extended durations. One of the central concerns for any population living below ground would have been the maintenance of air quality. The ventilation system of Derinkuyu remains one of its most sophisticated features. Dozens of vertical shafts, some extending from the deepest levels to the surface, ensured a continuous flow of air. These shafts were not placed randomly but appear to have been positioned to create circulation across different sections of the city. Archaeological measurements suggest that even at significant depths, oxygen levels could be maintained within a livable range. The dual function of certain shafts as both ventilation and water access points reflects an efficient integration of essential systems. The management of water resources was equally critical. The primary well within the city, connected to groundwater, allowed inhabitants to access fresh water without exposing themselves to external threats. Some scholars argue that additional wells may have been sealed off from the surface, ensuring that only those the underground network could reach them. This interpretation is supported by structural features indicating restricted access. The protection of water sources would have been vital during periods when the city was occupied as a refuge, particularly if external forces sought to cut off supplies. Food storage and preparation were organized with similar attention to sustainability. Storage rooms located in deeper, cooler sections of the city provided stable conditions for preserving grains, legumes, and other staples. The presence of large storage jars, or the carved spaces designed to hold them, suggests that food was accumulated in advance of occupation periods. This implies a level of anticipation and planning, rather than spontaneous use. Kitchens, identified by hearths and soot deposits, indicate that cooking was conducted within designated areas, likely to manage smoke and reduce the risk of fires spreading through confined spaces. The question of how long inhabitants could remain underground has been the subject of scholarly discussion. Estimates vary, but the available infrastructure suggests that communities could sustain themselves for weeks or possibly months, depending on the availability of stored resources and the number of present. The inclusion of facilities for food processing, such as grinding stones and presses for oil or wine, indicates that some level of production continued during occupation, rather than relying entirely on pre-stored supplies. Sanitation within the underground environment presents a more complex issue. Unlike water and ventilation systems, evidence for waste management is less. Some suggest that designated for waste disposal existed, possibly in peripheral or lower sections of the city. Others argue that occupation periods were likely limited in duration to avoid the accumulation of waste beyond manageable levels. The lack of archaeological evidence means that interpretations remain cautious, and this aspect of life in Derinkuyu is not fully understood. The presence of animals within the city adds another dimension to its operation. Stables identified in upper levels suggest that livestock were brought underground alongside humans. These animals would have provided essential resources, including milk, meat, and materials such as wool. However, their presence would also have increased the demand on ventilation systems and required additional management of waste and the placement of stables near entrances may have been intended to isolate these challenges from deeper living areas. Social organization within Derinkuyu can be inferred from the of spaces and the of communal areas. Larger rooms, possibly used for gatherings or coordinated activities, indicate that decision-making and social interaction were of underground. The absence of elaborate decoration or clear markers of status suggests that, during periods of refuge, practical considerations may have taken precedence over social hierarchy. However, it would be premature to conclude that social distinctions disappeared entirely. Rather, they may not be visible in the surviving architectural record. Religious practice appears to have remained an integral part of daily life. The chapels, the city, though in design, demonstrate continuity of worship even in of concealment. The orientation and layout of these spaces are consistent with known forms of early Christian architecture in Cappadocia. This suggests that religious rituals were maintained as a source of structure and cohesion for the community. The role of clergy or religious leaders within the underground setting is not directly documented, but the presence of dedicated worship spaces implies organized practice. Lighting would have been and carefully managed. Oil lamps, likely fueled by animal fat or plant oils, provided illumination in corridors and rooms. Niches carved into walls to hold these lamps are found throughout the city. The distribution of these niches indicates to balance visibility with conservation of resources. Excessive use of lamps would have consumed fuel and affected air quality, so lighting was probably restricted to activities and times. Movement, the city was controlled not only by architectural constraints but also by practicals to avoid confusion and maintain order. The complexity of it could easily lead to disorientation, particularly for those unfamiliar with its layout. It is likely that developed routines and mental maps of their surroundings, reinforced through repeated use. The existence of specific pathways connecting essential areas, such as water sources, kitchens, and living quarters, suggests that minimized unnecessary movement. Security remained a constant consideration. Even after entering the underground city, inhabitants would have been aware of the possibility of intrusion. The layered system of, including narrow passages, doors, and compartmentalized sections, allowed for progressives. If one section were compromised, others could be sealed off. This indicates a sophisticated understanding of risk management and spatial control. Communication with the surface, while limited, may not have been entirely severed during occupation. Some scholars propose that certain shafts or concealed openings allowed for observation or discreet when conditions permitted. However, direct evidence for systematic communication channels is limited. The balance between concealment and awareness of external events would have been delicate, requiring judgment and coordination. The psychological experience of living underground is difficult to reconstruct but cannot be ignored. Extended periods without natural light, confined spaces, and reliance on artificial systems would have shaped the daily of inhabitants. While the stable temperature and protection from external threats offered advantages, the environment also imposed constraints on movement, perception of time, and interaction with the outside world. The extent to which individuals adapted to these conditions likely varied, influenced by cultural expectations and previous experience with subterranean spaces. Comparisons with other underground sites in Cappadocia provide additional context. At Cappadocia, for example, similar of spaces and systems is observed, though with variations in layout and scale. These comparisons suggest that Derinkuyu was part of a broader tradition of underground construction, rather than an isolated innovation. Shared techniques and features point to the of knowledge across communities, through direct contact or parallel adaptation to similars. The eventual from the underground city, whether after a period of danger had passed or as part of longer-term shifts in settlement patterns, would have required of daily life. Returning to the surface meant re-engaging with agriculture, trade, and broader social networks. The flexibility to move between surface and subterranean environments indicates a dynamic relationship rather than a permanent. Archaeological evidence does not indicate a single of abandonment but rather a gradual reduction in use. Certain areas show signs of later modification, while others appear to have fallen out of use earlier. This uneven pattern suggests that different sections of the city may have been utilized at different times, reflecting changing needs and circumstances. In examining the operational aspects of Derinkuyu, it becomes clear that its significance lies not only in its scale but in the of its design. Every shaft, chamber, and passage contributes to a system that balances security, sustainability, and organization. The underground city represents a response to specific historical pressures, but it also demonstrates to create structured in an environment fundamentally different from the surface. The of research into these aspects continues to refine understanding, revealing it that was both resilient and adaptable. The evidence preserved within them offers insight into how human groups can reorganize their existence when confronted with uncertainty, drawing on available resources and accumulated knowledge to construct environments that meet both immediate and long-term needs. Generalizations about its use or origins. Contemporary research adopts a more cautious approach, distinguishing between evidence-based conclusions and areas where uncertainty remains. This shift reflects broader trends within archaeology, emphasizing interdisciplinary collaboration and methodological rigor. One area of ongoing debate concerns the extent to which Derinkuyu was connected to other underground complexes. While certain tunnels have been documented, including a passage reportedly linking Derinkuyu to the nearby site of Cappadocia, the full of connections is not fully mapped. Some researchers argue that extensive interconnectivity would have been impractical due to the labor required and the risk of structural instability. Others suggest that shorter, strategic links may have facilitated movement or communication between neighboring communities. Another topic of interest is the demographic capacity of the city. Estimates suggesting that up to 20,000 people could be accommodated are based on spatial calculations and comparisons with other sites. However, the actual number of inhabitants at any given time likely vary depending on circumstances. Factors such as available resources, duration of occupation, and external conditions would have influenced how many individuals could realistically be supported. As with many aspects of Derinkuyu, precise remain difficult to establish. The interpretation of specific rooms and features also continues to be refined. Designations such as school, chapel, or stable are based on architectural characteristics and comparative analysis, but they are not always definitive. Scholars emphasize the importance of avoiding overly rigid classifications, acknowledging that spaces may have served multiple functions or changed over time. This flexibility is consistent with its that the city developed incrementally, adapting to evolving needs. Public engagement with Derinkuyu has grown significantly in recent decades. Visitors descend through narrow passages, encountering a sequence of spaces that convey both the ingenuity and the of underground. Interpretive materials, including signage and guided tours, aim to provide context while respecting the limits of current knowledge. The experience of moving through the city offers a tangible connection to the past, though it is necessarily shaped by modern measures and accessibility considerations. Educational initiatives associated with the site extend beyond tourism. Academic institutions and research organizations continue to conduct fieldwork, publish findings, and across disciplines. Studies in areas such as environmental science and contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of the underground city. These efforts also highlight the challenge of preserving not only the physical structure but the information it contains. Derinkuyu's significance extends into broader discussions about human adaptation and resilience, then demonstrates how communities can respond to environmental and political challenges through innovative use of available resources. Its design reflects a balance between immediate needs, such as protection and sustenance, and longer-term considerations, including organization and cultural continuity. In this sense, it offers insights that are relevant beyond its specific historical context. At the same time, the site serves as a reminder of the limits of interpretation. Despite decades of research, many questions remain unanswered. The exact sequence of construction phases, the identities of the earliest builders, and that of daily life within the city are subjects of ongoing investigation. This uncertainty is not but an inherent aspect of archaeological study, reflecting the complexity of reconstructing the past from incomplete evidence. Future research may address some of these gaps. Non-invasive techniques, such as ground-penetrating radar and microclimate analysis, hold promise for hidden sections and understanding environmental dynamics without disturbing the structure. Continued collaboration between local authorities, international researchers, and conservation experts will be essential in guiding these efforts. As Derinkuyu continues to be studied, its role within the history of Cappadocia becomes increasingly clear. It is not an isolated phenomenon but part of responses to a specific conditions. The underground city embodies a form that is both practical and adaptive, shaped by the interplay of geology, culture, and the corridors and chambers, once filled with the sounds of daily activity, now remain largely silent. Yet within that silence lies a record, one that is still being read, interpreted, and reconsidered. Each investigation adds to a growing body of knowledge, while also reinforcing the need for careful, evidence-based analysis. In this way, Derinkuyu continues to function as a site of discovery, offering insights not only into the past but into the processes by which the past is understood.